Okay, good morning again, ladies. These will be the answers to homeworks number 10 and 11. Let's see how quickly we can get through these, not to make the video quite so long. Okay, so number 1, homework number 10. What three things encouraged the shipbuilding industry? Well, there were three main things. The fishing was so plentiful, the whaling, which we talked about, where they got the whale oil, and trading. And so it really built up the shipbuilding industry. So number 2, I asked you to fully explain the process of shipbuilding from New England forest all the way to watertight ships. And the process includes, I said, roughly 6 steps. Some of you kind of combined and made them 4 or 5, but these were the 6 points that I wanted you to add in. The forest provided the raw materials, the actual lumber, the big logs. They would chop down the trees, cut off all the branches. Number 2, they would from inland, they would float these logs down river to the coastal towns. Number 3, once they got there, the craft workers would produce naval stores. So from the lumber, from the logs that came down, they would produce all the materials they needed to build the ships. Number 4 was they would use oak trees to make the planks of the ships. Number 5 was they needed pine trees to make the masts. The tall pine trees were the tallest ones. They would make the masts of the ships. And finally, from those same pine trees, they would use pine tar to make pitch, which they would put on the insides of the ships and the planks to make sure that they were watertight and keep the water out. Number 3, why was the work of the coopers important to ship's crew and to local merchants? Notice I put the capital letters in "and," meaning I wanted you to answer both of those. The coopers were important to a ship's crew because they maintained, the coopers built the barrels that were needed for long journeys. They also repaired them. For merchants, it was important to have coopers because, again, the merchants used barrels to store grain and dried fish and other foods, molasses and whale oil. And so coopers were important to both ship crews and merchants. Number 4, by the late 1700s, what statistic was noted about English ships? And a couple of you had to go back and find this one. Nearly 1/3 of all English ships were built in New England. So out of all of the ships that England had, by the late 1700s, nearly 1/3 of them came from the colonies, were built in the colonies. And number 5, why did the shipbuilding industry contribute so greatly to the prosperity of many coastal New England towns? The answer that I was looking for was that the low cost of building ships in New England was wonderful. That you could build a ship at half the cost that it did in Europe. And so obviously they were able to build so many ships, it contributed to the prosperity of many of the coastal towns. Okay, those were the answers to homework number 10. Homework number 11. Number 1, based on this page, what is a line graph? It is a line graph is a graph that uses a line to show changes over time. Now, many of you, and mostly your parents, probably have been watching these graphs, these line graphs, on TV and in any news broadcast, because number 2, explain how a line graph might be used in tracking coronavirus cases. And some of you were very, very specific and said that you could put the number of corona cases up the vertical axis of the graph, and then you could put dates along the bottom of the graph. And as the number of cases increased, you would track the number of cases and see how many cases we had by a certain date. Number 3, according to the line graph on page 205, and you needed to refer to that graph, what is your estimate of the value in pounds of colonial exports to England in 1710? Well, it was about 375,000 pounds. If you look at the line graph, it wasn't, the dot for 1710 wasn't quite up to 500,000, but it wasn't halfway. It was a little more than halfway, so 375,000 pounds. And a pound, again, is not the weight that we talk about here in the United States. In England, a pound was a value of currency. And so we used dollars, they used pounds, and so it was 375,000 pounds. Number 4, how had the value changed from 1700 to 1710? And the answer was it went down. So from 1700 to 1710, the value, the number of exports actually went down. The second part of 4 was what might have been reasons for the change in exports from 1700 to 1710. There were any number of reasons why that could have happened, and this was not really even in the book. I wanted you to think about it. Come, give me some answers, give me some reasons why the numbers may have gone down. It may have been that they were fighting with the Indians during some of those years, and so they were not able to produce as many ships. Maybe the supplies were not coming down the river as often as they needed. Maybe there weren't as many men building the ships during some of those years. Maybe there was a sickness and not as many were able to work during those years. And so really, there were different answers, but I really just wanted you to think about that. All right, number 5, the last answer. Number 5, approximately how much did exports change from 1700 to 1750? And the second part was what are possible reasons for this change? So from 1700 to 1750, the exports went up about 500,000 pounds. The graph showed it was just about under, in 1700, just about under 500,000 pounds. And in 1750 is just about under 1 million pounds. So from 500,000 to 1 million is about 500,000 pounds. So it went up about 500,000 pounds, but that was a 50-year period. So it went up about 500,000 pounds. And what are some possible reasons for this change? Well, any number of reasons again, and I just wanted you to think about what could be some possible reasons. First, for instance, people were creating more items to be exported. There were more ships to be used to export. There were actually a lot more people as the years went on, 1700 to 1750, more and more people were coming from England and other areas to live in the New England area. And so more people, more ships, more items they were producing for export. And so it went up tremendously from 1700 to 1750. Okay, those are the answers to homework numbers 10 and 11. You're now ready for tomorrow's quiz number 3, part 1. Friday will be part 2. You'll use those notes and you'll be free to use your textbooks as well. See you later. Bye-bye.